Want to get away, see the world, and do it all on your own terms without dealing with the annoyances of other people? Then consider this a sign that you need to book a solo cruise. Chef's kiss, highly recommend. Welcome to my cruise pod. I'm Melissa, a university professor who loves to cruise and who loves to talk ship. I also just happened to get home from a solo cruise on Virgin Voyages. So what better time to devote an episode to the exciting and liberating world of solo cruising? Now, cruising alone is becoming increasingly popular, and no matter what you're looking for, be it relaxation, adventure, or just some much needed me time, cruising solo can truly be an incredible experience. But if you've never done it before, it can be intimidating. I obviously love to travel, and I don't always have friends and family who have as much freedom, flexibility, or disposable income as I do. So I don't always have someone to go with me. And dipping my toe into solo travel was really intimidating. I was afraid I would be lonely, that people would feel sorry for me, that I would get bored. And cruising was a great entree into solo travel because it is so much less intimidating and is inherently designed in a way that really is welcoming for solo cruisers because you get to meet other people because you run into them over and over again because you're sharing the same ship for several days with the same group of people and you're all going to the same spots. After I finally got up the nerve to take my first ever solo cruise, that gave me the nerve to take my first ever land-based solo trip to Paris and Milan for the trip of a lifetime, and I did it all by myself. So here are my top 5 tips for cruising solo to ensure that you have the best time at sea and that while you're alone, you're never lonely. Tip number 1 is to first choose the right cruise line and ship. Now, I hate to say this because I love cruising and I'm a big fan of solo travel, but not all cruise lines are necessarily solo traveler friendly. So it's important to choose the right one. The problem is cruise lines, they charge what's called a single supplement. So if you're a solo cruiser taking up a stateroom cabin, you're going to get charged basically the fare for 2 people. Now you'll only pay the port fees and taxes for 1 person, but you are basically paying full fare for 2 people. Now, what you can consider is that some cruise lines will offer what are called solo cabins. Unfortunately, these are not universal, and some cruise lines do this a little better than others. Norwegian is one that does offer solo-specific cabins, which they dub studio staterooms. These are designed for solo cruisers, and they are generally more affordable than booking a regular stateroom with a single supplement, and they're designed to be cozy. Now, if you want to snag one of these solo cabins, you might need to book your cruise pretty far out because there are not many of them on Norwegian cruise ships or other cruise lines that offer those rare solo cabins. They're pretty small in inventory, so you need to book it pretty far out if you want to get one. Another thing to consider are solo perks. Look for cruise lines that really do solo travel really well. As I mentioned, Norwegian does it well with those solo studio staterooms, but they also do a good job with hosting gatherings. Another cruise line I think that is really friendly for solo travelers, not necessarily in price, but in terms of activities, is Virgin Voyages. And that's the cruise line that I just sailed on my own solo cruise. All the cruise lines are going to offer a solo travelers meetup, but usually they just pick a time, a date, and a location, which is usually a bar, and they just expect solo cruisers to meet up and just kind of do their own thing. There's not really much structure or plan to it. Virgin Voyages, on the other hand, makes more of a concerted effort to actually design programs for solo cruisers in mind, and I was really impressed with the way that they handled it. So Norwegian and Virgin are kind of 2 lines that do it really well for solo cruisers. Another thing to consider is ship size and ship vibe. If you want to meet people, you're feeling social, your better bet is going to be to book an itinerary on a smaller cruise ship. That's because there are fewer people. You'll tend to run into the same people over and over again, making it easier to meet people and introduce yourself and make friends. Now, there's not as much to do on the smaller ships, so if you're not as concerned with making friends, but you're rather more concerned with activities and not being bored as a solo traveler, you probably want to look to itineraries that are hosted on larger ships because there you'll find a much more variety of activities and entertainment to keep you busy. If you're on a budget, do some research, especially on pricing, to find that best option to avoid getting hosed as a solo cruiser. Because when it comes to cost, cruising is not always the best for solo travelers. Now, for me personally, I sail on cruise casino free offers, which is not just the best way that I sail solo, but also with other people because they're free. I just pay port fees and taxes. And when I do a casino-free sailing on a cruise, as a solo traveler, I don't get stuck with any sort of single supplement. I literally just pay port fees and taxes for myself, and it's super cheap. Now, if you're interested in learning more about cruise casino sailings, that's a whole complicated other topic. I have a video about it. I'll drop the link below in the comments so you can check it out. But if you are able to kind of tap into the casino freebie program, that is a great option for solo travelers. Tip number 2, make connections early on. Cruising solo doesn't mean that you're lonely, unless you want to be. And I'll be honest, my most recent solo cruise, I was very much not in the mood to be social. In fact, I was antisocial. I needed a lot of R&R. I just wanted to be left alone by everyone, including strangers, my kids, my family, everybody. And I just wanted to chill. And it was really a great way for me to rest up and rejuvenate. But if you want to make connections and you want to make friends, there's lots of ways to connect with other people on board and even before the cruise. One tip is to join meetups. As I mentioned in tip number 1, most of the cruise lines will host various social events for solo travelers. They do try to host these early on in the itinerary, so you have a chance to meet people early on in the cruise. Now, it is important to make a distinction that some cruise lines will offer solo cruiser meetups, and they might also offer single cruiser meetups. They are different things. Now, you might be a single cruiser who's also traveling solo, in which case you probably want to go to both. But in my case, I just sailed solo, but I am not single. So I had no interest in a single cruiser meetup. I wanted to go to the solo cruiser meetup. And on the flip side, if you're sailing with someone else and you're not even a solo cruiser, you by all means are welcome to attend a single cruiser meetup that's meant for people looking for romance compared to looking for friends. So make sure that you know the distinction between those two. Another thing to consider are dining options. Now, the cruise line world used to be very different. Back in the day, communal dining was kind of the norm. So this is when you went to any meal in the main dining room or the MDR, and they would seat you, whether you're cruising solo or with other people, with other strangers. And it's part of cruise culture to make friends in the main dining room. Now, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. People, I don't know if they're just more antisocial now or what, but I find that most cruisers, including myself, don't partake in communal dining. I will once in a while, but generally I like to just be with my own people, or if I'm cruising solo, I just like to be by myself, even if that means eating by myself. I prefer that sometimes. But if you do want to strike up conversations and make new friends over a meal, you can request communal dining in the main dining room. And sometimes sharing a meal is an easy place and way to strike up conversation and get to know strangers and to make new friends. Now, as I mentioned in tip 1, Virgin Voyages does a great job when it comes to accommodating solo cruisers and providing ways for them to make friends. And I like the way Virgin does it. Virgin doesn't actually have a main dining room. They have different specialty restaurants instead that are all included in the cruise fare. And regardless of which restaurant you dine in, they'll have a designated space, not just for communal dining, but for solo cruisers communal dining. Now, if you just want to eat alone, by all means, you can do that. But if you do want to be seated on a Virgin cruise with other solo cruisers, they'll be happy to do that for you. I did that for one meal on my Virgin cruise and I made some new friends, so it was great. Another option are online groups, specifically Facebook. Before your cruise, join Facebook groups or other online forums for your specific sailing. Now, I never knew that Facebook cruise groups were a thing until probably like my 5th cruise, and I really missed out. So what you do is you go to Facebook, you type in your ship name and the sail date, and chances are good you'll find a Facebook group dedicated to that specific sailing. Now, these are nothing official. They're not run or hosted or endorsed by any cruise line. This is basically just where some random cruiser on that sailing took the initiative to make a Facebook group and to moderate it. But these are great ways to meet other people online. This goes for if you're cruising solo or not. I love the Facebook cruise groups. Now, what I recommend doing is you find the Facebook group for your sailing, join it, and post a picture of yourself if you feel comfortable doing that and you do want to be social and make new friends. Share a little bit about yourself, but be safe, don't share too much, and let people know that you'll be cruising solo and ask if there are other solo cruisers that might want to meet up. People are usually pretty friendly online in cruise groups and on cruises, So if you're open to meeting others, don't hesitate to say hello in these online groups. And then because people have seen your photo, they may recognize you on the actual ship, and that makes it a little bit easier to strike up a conversation with a new friend. Number 3, plan your excursions wisely. Shore excursions are a great way to explore new destinations, and I'm a big fan of not staying on the ship, but on port days, getting the heck off of it and exploring. For me, that's the point of cruising. And as a solo traveler, you have full control over your itinerary. If you don't want to get off the ship, you stay on the ship. If you want to get off and explore, you can. It's basically whatever you want to do. Now, here are some tips for solo excursions. One recommendation are group excursions. Now, I'm not usually a huge fan of group tours because I don't like being stuck with random people and I don't like bigger groups. But in this case, when sailing as a solo cruiser, group excursions can be a great way to meet new people. While you're sharing a cruise ship with people, even a small ship is going to potentially have thousands of people. If you take a group tour, however, you're going to be spending 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 hours doing an activity with a smaller group, anywhere from probably 5 to up to 30 people. That is a great way to be safe in a contained, safe environment, but to meet people in a smaller, less intimidating setting, and you also don't feel isolated. So it's a really great way to meet people on these excursions. Now, if you're more independent, you don't want to be in a group, you can always do the DIY, do-it-yourself adventures or an independent excursion. You can use apps like Google Maps to navigate. Check out my website, profmelissa.com, for detailed port guides of things to do. And you can book through the cruise line or through local operators if you do want to do a planned excursion. Now, one thing that's important to note is if you do go on your own independently, that you really have to be cognizant of your time. Now, you always have to be mindful of time, regardless of if you're cruising by yourself or with a group. But I can tell you from experience, sometimes when I cruise with other people, sometimes I depend on them of, wait, what was our return to ship time? Was it 3:30 or 4:30? Oh, it was 4:30. But if you're on your own, you don't have really anybody to lean on or to ask or to back you up of, am I remembering that right? So if you go out on your own, make absolutely certain that you are mindful of the return to ship time and you keep track of time because you don't have anyone else there doing it with you. Another thing is to look at online groups. As I mentioned before, there are great online forums like the Facebook cruise groups, but there are also websites and apps like Cruise Critic and Shipmate. This is where they'll have what are called roll calls, and they will help you connect with people online that are on your sailing, so you can find fellow passengers. If you do connect with people on your sailing in advance and you feel like you vibe with them, you like them, you may want to consider booking with them to split the cost of an excursion with a small group. For example, one activity that I love to do in many port cities is to book a private driver. Most of these drivers start at $200 to $300 for the day. Now that's pretty expensive as a solo traveler, but that cost is the same whether it's one person, 2, 3, 4, 5, or sometimes even 6 people. So if you can make friends with people online, people that you trust and that are interested in doing the same things as you, you can split the cost of things like an excursion or a private driver or a private experience and really cut your cost down significantly. So exploring solo, it doesn't mean you have to go it alone or you have to pay for everything by yourself. You have to find a balance that works for you and consider what's important to you. Tip number 4 is to embrace your independence. One of my favorite things about solo travel, cruising or otherwise, is the freedom. I love doing what I want, when I want, how I want. I don't have to answer to my kids. I don't have to spend hours at a water slide that I hate because my kids want to do it. I don't have to consider what other people want. I get to do what I want. Use this opportunity to lean into it. No is a complete sentence. If someone asks you to do something or you feel pressure to do something, just say no. You're by yourself. You answer only to you. One thing you could do is set your own schedule. Enjoy the flexibility of waking up late or wake up early and make as much noise as you want in your room without worrying about waking up your husband, your spouse, your kids, whatever. You can skip activities, spend hours by the pool, spend hours taking a nap. You don't have to answer to anyone. Do you. You only do what you want, how you want, and when you want it. This is the absolute beauty of solo travel. On my solo cruise, I spent a lot of time chilling in bed, watching movies, chilling on the balcony, and just keeping to myself, and it was wonderful. Another thing is to try new things. While it's great to do what you want, it's also a great time to step outside your comfort zone and really challenge yourself. Try that cooking class, join a dance lesson, try rock climbing, whatever it is that catches your eye that you've always wanted to do, but something has held you back, or the person you're with doesn't like to do that activity, go ahead and do it. And embrace that quiet time. As I mentioned, I really embrace the quiet time on this most recent solo cruise because solo cruising is perfect for unwinding. Bring a good book, treat yourself to a spa treatment, or just simply sit on the balcony with a cup of coffee and enjoy those ocean views. Really use this as a chance to prioritize your own happiness. Tip 5, stay safe. I hate to say this, but this is an important consideration, and unfortunately, it's especially important for women solo travelers, but men too. Safety is always a priority, but here are some strategies so you can cruise solo confidently. One is to be aware of your surroundings. Whether you're on board the ship or in port, trust your gut, stay alert, and trust your instincts. Now, a great thing about cruising, now you can't get complacent, you can't just let your guard down all the time on a cruise, but cruise lines do run passenger manifest by Customs and Border Protection. So if someone is a wanted murderer, for example, that's an extreme example, they're not going to be on a cruise ship. Now, that doesn't mean everyone on a cruise ship is great and they're all trustworthy and they're all safe. You still have to be mindful and trust your instincts. But by and large, on a cruise ship, you're a little safer than you would be pretty much doing any other type of travel where people are otherwise not vetted in any sort of way. But be aware of your surroundings. If something doesn't feel right, remove yourself from the situation. Also, this is really important, stay connected. Share your itinerary with a trusted friend or family member back home and make sure, even though you're trying to probably disconnect and unwind, make sure you check in periodically. Make sure someone knows where you're at. If you feel comfortable sharing your location, that's helpful for someone back home to know where you're at when you're wandering around a port area. And while cruise ship internet packages aren't necessarily cheap, it might be a worthwhile investment just to make sure that you are staying in touch with someone back home. And then finally, use common sense. Avoid excessive alcohol consumption. You don't have a friend or someone looking out for you. Make sure that you're watching your drink. Don't let someone drug your drink. This doesn't happen, at least from what I've heard, very often on a cruise ship, because another great thing about cruises, there are cameras everywhere, which tends to lend to a more safe environment. By all means, it's not perfectly safe. There's no such thing as a perfectly safe environment at all times. But on the cruise ship, you're generally a little safer. But when you're out in ports and you're maybe exploring new bars, just kind of keep an eye on your drink and make sure someone doesn't tamper with that. Also, make sure you keep your valuables secure. Invest in a fanny pack or a backpack that locks, and make sure that you stick to well-lit, populated areas. Don't venture too far off from the tourist hubs. Another thing that I do is I always keep some credit card and cash back in my stateroom safe, as well as some with me. Because keep in mind, if you're at a cruise port as a solo traveler, someone pickpockets you or steals your stuff, if all of your money and credit cards are with you and they're gone, you have really no money to get yourself home or even maybe back to the ship because you don't have someone with you that can spot you the money. So I always do that as an extra precaution. Thankfully, I've personally never had anything stolen, but these touristy areas can be areas where people take advantage of tourists and pickpocket and steal. But with a few precautions, solo cruising can be both safe and empowering. So solo cruising, it's all about creating the experience that you want. So this is your sign. If you've been intimidated about solo travel, I promise you, I was there too. Once I did it, I fell in love with it, and I do it at least once a year now. So this is your sign. Book that cruise, pack your bags, and get ready to enjoy the open seas your way. So if you've ever cruised solo, I want to know your tips and experiences. Did you like it? Did you hate it? What are the best strategies for newbies? And if you've never done it before, tell me what's holding you back. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. And as always, if you found this information helpful, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And visit my website, profmelissa.com, for tons of additional information, including free port guides, cruise tips, advice, and more.